The CIA is often depicted as an administration of brave, mysterious, and highly skilled spies. Honorable men and women who sacrifice everything for the purpose of battling the forces of evil, all for our protection. But their secrecy conveniently gives them the ability to control the narrative. They can project their carefully crafted image and obscure the public from seeing their influence on our everyday social lives.
Why are you here? I say we are all here in this room because we believe. We believe in good and evil, and we choose good. We believe in right and wrong, and we choose right.
Do you actually believe this guy? Now imagine a group of people who live double lives day in and day out. They have secrets on everyone but can't trust anyone. Then grant this group with the privilege to spy, manipulate, and experiment on people without their knowledge or consent. And imagine what kinds of characters would rise to the top of such a place. Think Hollywood, Wall Street, Washington, D.C., and Silicon Valley, but with even greater power. The Central Intelligence Agency was established in 1947, immediately after World War II. The US government was concerned with the commies, Russia, China, and North Korea.
1/3 of mankind exist under communist tyranny without the God-given rights of freedom and human dignity.
One of their fears was that their opponents were using mind control techniques on US prisoners of war and other enemies, so why not create a program of their own? The US hired former Nazi scientists and psychologists and enlisted help from top researchers across the country. And eventually, in 1953, the top-secret project MKUltra was born. The goal was to control behavior and manipulate people's minds using any means necessary. They got creative, trying LSD, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, sexual abuse, and other forms of torture. But that's okay, right? Whatever it takes to fight the forces of evil.
Our cause is just. Our enemies, everywhere. They're all around us. Some scary stuff out there.
The CIA turned to lysergic acid diethylamide, also known as LSD. LSD was in its infancy. A Swiss scientist had discovered its psychedelic effects just a decade earlier, and it was starting to be used for psychiatric therapy. So CIA strategists wondered, could the mind-altering drug also be used for brainwashing or psychological torture? Their scope was broad. They experimented on both members of the military and civilians. Sometimes the subjects knew, sometimes they didn't. They targeted mental patients, prisoners, drug addicts, prostitutes, people who could not fight back. It was the perfect job for reckless, thrill-seeking, and psychopathic people. One supervisor, George White, described it as fun, fun, fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill and cheat, steal, deceive, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest? So the fun, fun, fun began. They tested LSD on American soldiers. They experimented at hospitals. One hospital kept 7 subjects on LSD for 77 days straight. They tested LSD on unsuspecting horny men in the late-night alleyways of San Francisco. In Operation Midnight Climax, prostitutes were hired to lure in clients to CIA safe houses where they slipped the men LSD and then observed their behaviors behind two-way mirrors. Then the fun moved to restaurants, bars, and beaches. They also experimented on their own. There was the case of Frank Olson, one of their own scientists who had slipped LSD, spiraled out of control, and then a week later fell to his death from his hotel window in what was reported as a suicide. They also targeted research institutions, at least 44 colleges. Many of them were clueless as to where their grant funding came from.
Does anything make much sense to you now? No.
The whole country could be the CIA's laboratory.
No.
No situation seemed off limits, but after decades of illegal experimentation, the MKUltra researchers determined LSD to be too unpredictable, so they shut down the program and tried to sweep it under the rug. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered all MKUltra files to be destroyed. Better to keep the public in the dark.
I think there's much more to be done before the public and our country really does appreciate that it has the best intelligence service in the world. It really does. There's not a shadow of a doubt. It's an intelligence service that works under American standards and is going to operate under the American Constitution. This country, we believe that everybody has to operate under the law and that we in the government must serve the people under the law.
Helms didn't know that a cache of 20,000 MKUltra documents were filed in the wrong place, so they survived the purge. Those files were declassified and provide the basis of whatever we know today. Just enough fodder for fictional storylines and conspiracy theories. The public tends to overlook the fact that the CIA is a large government bureaucracy. They're no stranger to typical workplace politics, incompetence, and sexual harassment.
Arms above your head, please.
They might have secrets the rest of us don't, but they too can be hacked.
But a good interrogator can also soften a subject. You know, knock them off balance, make them vulnerable.
They're humans.
No.
So they come with emotional triggers and cognitive biases. And just like any bureaucracy, everyone knows that things can and often will go wrong. For one, the bureaucracy did not anticipate the magic pill trickling out to the general public and fueling one of the greatest modern rebellions against authority, the 60s counterculture movement.
CBS News, without any flowers in its hair, is in San Francisco because this city has gained the reputation of being the hippie capital of the world.
A group of social influencers known as the acid populace believed that if enough people used LSD, then society as a whole could be transformed for the better. One of these men was a Stanford student named Ken Kesey.
I went to Stanford on a Ford Foundation fellowship, and while at Stanford, I was given the opportunity to go to the Stanford Hospital and take part in the LSD experiments.
And it wasn't long before he started giving the drug to his friends. They got the idea for a social experiment. Calling themselves Kesey and the Merry Pranksters, they traveled across the country in a bus, and they hosted psychedelic parties called acid tests. LSD also reached Harvard psychology professors Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert. They saw the therapeutic potential of LSD and didn't think it right to constrain access to a select few.
When people say, what's the use of LSD? I translate that into what's the use of my head, and that's a fascinating problem. Yeah, suppose man can use more of his brain.
So they distributed it to students. Their reckless behaviors would soon get them fired from Harvard. Richard Alpert would later go on a spiritual quest to India and return as Ram Dass, while Timothy Leary campaigned to introduce LSD to public intellectuals and artists.
Drop out. Tune in. We're turned on, and we're tuned in, and we're very dropped out.
He became so influential that President Richard Nixon once described him as the most dangerous man in America. The LSD archetype became this: descend into madness and emerge enlightened, seeing the world anew. It encouraged people to question authority, government, wars, social norms, and materialism. It was an open rebellion against traditional values in favor of drugs, sex, and alternative lifestyles.
The American people don't want a government of spies and wiretapping. We don't want a government that's drafting our kids and sending them off. We don't want a government of narcotics agents busting into middle-class people's houses.
But the mind-altering drugs were also mood-altering. The countercultural fantasies of freedom and love also manifested as extreme indulgence in hedonistic and narcissistic tendencies. It stimulated whatever unconscious desires lurked beneath the surface. A bad acid trip could trigger a downward spiral into psychosis.
There is a steady flow into San Francisco hospitals of young people who have freaked out and been picked up by the police in a state of desperate terror.
There is nothing smart, there is nothing grown up or sophisticated in taking an LSD trip at all. They're just being complete fools.
Psychedelic experiences also promoted postmodern extreme relativism, where people interpreted reality to be entirely subjective. If nothing is good nor bad, true nor false, but whatever you choose to make of it, then anything goes. Soon it combined bohemian hedonism with social justice principles. This sparked a culture war between hippies and traditional middle-class values.
The Nixon administration had told the American people the #1 corrupting influence and danger to the American way of life is drugs. And he was absolutely right. Now, he couldn't do anything about it. The more he talked about drugs, the more billions of dollars he put into his army of narcs that went around the world bothering people. More and more people were taking drugs.
President Nixon went to the Narcotics Bureau today to sign a drug bill.
As LSD became associated with counterculture, it became stigmatized and illegal, and the high priest of LSD was punished along with it. While the counterculture movement promoted exuberance and indulgence, it also turned people on to developing their better selves. It sparked the human potential movement. Psychology traditionally focused on curing problems and disorders, but this new movement embraced things like happiness, creativity, and fulfillment.
The higher the degree of psychological health, the greater the frequency of peak experiences, the higher they reach, the more intense they are, and the more illuminated, that is, the more cognitive they are, the more you learn from them.
In 1962, 2 Stanford graduates founded a small retreat center in Big Sur, California called Esalen. Their goal was to create a space where people could explore and practice various holistic approaches for personal transformation that involved the body, mind, and spirit.
The mind-body connection hadn't been developed and researched yet. Bringing Eastern meditation practices and yoga to the West, that was in its infancy. Developing what we know now today as somatics, which is putting all these different kinds of personal physical development together with your emotional development. That didn't exist. We didn't have the idea of experiential education, hands-on. Education was very classroom and rigid. And all of these different things that these 2 young thinkers wanted to explore weren't being done in the universities and the research institutes. They wrote to everybody they wanted to hear from, people like Buckminster Fuller, Timothy Leary, and then also meditation people like Alan Watts, and Aldous Huxley spoke there. He was one of their main inspirations. They wrote to all these people in the early 60s and to see if they would come. They all said yes.
In a few short years, the Esalen experiment became a mecca where ordinary individuals could participate in workshops taught by some of the most extraordinary thinkers of the time. They developed people's social intelligence by training them to manage their own emotions and to communicate more effectively. People function not in isolation, but in a web of social relationships. So if we alter our consciousness and change ourselves, then we have the power to change our social environments. Though the CIA initially intended to control people's minds, they inadvertently did the exact opposite. Many people realized that they could make their minds stronger at any age. With tools like meditation, yoga, communication, and other skills, people could heal their childhood traumas and dissolve negative thought patterns, enter flow states, hack consciousness, and boost creativity. Essentially, we had the ability to resolve our neuroticism, addictions, and other everyday problems of living.
I'd like to buy the world a home and furnish it with love.